Hello and welcome back to Tits, Tums and All Things Mum. I'm here with the lovely Manpreet today from Next Feed Podcast. How are you?
Hello, I'm really good, thank you. Yeah,
Good.
I'm so chuffed to be here. It's like one of those things that's in the diary and you're like, oh, I'm really excited. And then it gets to the day and then you're like, I don't know what to wear.
Yeah, I feel like we booked this absolutely ages ago.
I think we did.
Yeah, but amazing. You're finally here. And you want to start by telling us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Manpreet and I've got a 1-year-old. No, I haven't. I've got one 3.5-year-old. I do this quite often. One 3.5-year-old, a little boy. And I'm a broadcast journalist by trade. So I did that for quite a long time. I think 14 years. And I worked in radio, in news. So my work has been like great fun, but also at times really, really serious. So very different to motherhood. And then, I had a bit of a tough breastfeeding journey. So I ended up starting the Next Feed podcast, which, believe it or not, is about, that next feed, that kind of, that feeling you have when you have a newborn and all of the things that come with like feeding your baby milk, however you do it, the kind of the stresses and the lovely moments as well. But it's a place where we talk about all aspects of breastfeeding.
I love that because I feel like so many mums need that. Honestly, I think breastfeeding is one of the hardest things I've done in my life. And I've done a lot of hard things, but nobody tells you that. No. Like, you just assume it's this really natural thing. Like, the baby comes out, they just latch on, that's it, done, sorted. For some people it is like that, don't get me wrong.
Yeah, and that's amazing.
Yeah, amazing, go you. But also for some people, it is really hard. And it's like an art that you have to master. Like both of you have to really learn, really persevere and like kind of be dedicated to going for it really.
Yeah, absolutely. But there is that image, isn't there, of like your baby, like, just you kind of cradling them and they're just latched on perfectly and, your hair's probably looking amazing and you've got a bit of a glow behind you. And I think that is the image of breastfeeding. And the reality is, like, it's just so different, isn't it? And it's different at different stages as well. And I think that, like you, I was not really prepared for it. I think it was all a bit of a, this is what it's like.
I was so naive, like, I was terrible. I didn't do any reading whatsoever about my first child because I just assumed that everyone has kids. Like, not everyone's going to read a book. I'm going to be fine. And then she comes out and I start trying to feed. It's going wrong. I can't get her to latch on. And I'm just like, what the hell? Why is this so difficult? It shouldn't be this difficult. And actually, there was a real lack of support as well, I felt. So it was a struggle for many reasons because of that.
And I think that support that you just mentioned, it's like the thing that I hear the most when I'm talking to not only experts in breastfeeding. So I'm really lucky I get to speak to all sorts of people that have kind of like researched or they support people professionally in breastfeeding. They've written books or they might lecture on the subject. But then also stories of all sorts of women, like women that might have like their day job is nothing to do with like children or babies or anything. And they end up, making the decision to have a baby. And it's like, it's just such a shock.
Yeah.
And from all of my guests, all I hear is there was no support. Yeah. Like literally there was no support. And that's often it. So a lot of people that end up maybe supporting people professionally. So like there might be a breastfeeding counsellor or an IBCLC, which is basically somebody that's really highly trained in breastfeeding. They've studied for years and years and they've done exams. And a lot of them have had their own issues. So it's not like they're supporting women having had like this amazing like time breastfeeding. They're often people that have struggled just as much as the people they're supporting. And it's such a shock when you learn about like the fact that this is a thing, like that breastfeeding can be really difficult and it can be like time consuming.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Like
100%.
Nobody told us that, right?
I know, right? And you have to pay for IBCLCs though. That's the only thing. And like not everyone has that luxury. Like when the second time round, I did pay for one because I was so desperate for some support and it was in COVID and there was no one. It was like tumbleweeds out there for breastfeeding support. we did pay for one, but not everyone has that luxury. And certainly the first time around, we wouldn't have been able to afford it. So we need a bit more support. So your podcast being out there just for like someone to listen and just be like, oh, okay, like this is normal. Me literally losing the plot and feeling like I'm failing is normal. And just, you know, someone said to me once, don't quit on your worst day of breastfeeding because the next day might be better, and just keep going with that mindset. And
that, you know, the kind of like don't quit on your worst day is really interesting, because I think that I get why people say it, but I also think that, you know, when you are having that worst day,
God, yeah. I remember
like
them.
Just imagine being in that space. And I think it's really difficult. So like you, I had, so I think I had, my little boy is the same age as yours, so 3.5.
Yeah.
And we went through like probably a very similar experience without knowing each other. You know, it was COVID. There was like, you know, when you went to a scan appointment, you couldn't have anyone there, all that kind of stuff. And it was really...
The waiting rooms were like sat with like chairs here, and you're just looking at everyone like, what's going on?
It's so weird, isn't it, to think that we went through that. And that's a time when you need like to be held as like you know, somebody that's going to soon be giving birth and whatever. But it was, I think that I totally lost the plot. Why have I lost the plot? 3.5.
Because I interrupted you. That's what I do. We've both got kids the same age. We went through the same experience of like early motherhood.
Yeah, I think the reason why I just did that was because I was like, has my husband put my child to bed yet? Have they had their dinner? I think it's that. You must get this as well. It's like...
How do you know you're a mum? Tell me you're a mum without telling me you're a mum.
I do this really often.
You're talking, but your brain is thinking like, what's going on at home? Are they okay? Are they alive?
I went to the supermarket the other day and I was talking to the lady and I bagged everything up and I actually started to walk out. And then she was like, oh, excuse me, you haven't paid. I was like, okay. I thought the chat was enough.
My brain was already elsewhere.
Exactly. No, but during lockdown, there was like no support, was there? There was, if you struggled with breastfeeding, unfortunately, you probably wouldn't have got the support that you needed. And if you did, you were incredibly, incredibly lucky. But it was probably, you know, when you get support, you don't necessarily just need it then in that moment, do you? You need to be checked up on again, and you need to, I mean, you might have a lovely feed while somebody is looking after you. So like say if you're really lucky and you've got the time of a midwife for 5-10 minutes and they're helping you with breastfeeding, they might get your baby latched on really well and it might be going really nicely, you know, and then they walk away and then it might be the next feed, but it might not be that midwife. You know, she might have finished her shift, which is perfectly reasonable to do, but you might not get that support again. And that's the thing. I think it's literally luck of the draw. You know, what time did you give birth? What hospital, in what area? And then also like when you do get home, what are the health visiting team like? You know, how skilled are they in breastfeeding support?
Well, I presume they weren't even coming out for you, because we didn't get any health visitors with Bailey because of COVID. So we were just kind of like pushed out literally 12 hours after I'd given birth to him, and it was like, cool, bye.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good luck.
Do you know what? I was so lonely. Do you not think, like looking back?
I mean, I quite enjoyed it because I'm not really a fan of people coming
Lovely.
to my house. So like with my daughter, like 9 people turned up the day that I got home, and I was like, just piss off. But with Bailey, it was COVID, so I was like, no, sorry, can't come over, it's COVID. I was making the most of it. I was like, yep. And my husband was furloughed, so we were just a family of 4 at home, kind of enjoying those newborn days. And I could literally be sat naked on the sofa breastfeeding all the time, whereas I don't think my guests would have quite enjoyed that.
Well, you know,
sat naked.
They might have done.
I actually did. Like the first time everyone came round when I had my daughter, I was just like, do you know what? I don't give a fuck anymore. Like, I'm just going to sit here with my boobs out because I'm trying to feed this child that doesn't know how to latch on. And you're all here. I don't want you to be here, but I'm just going to do it and hopefully make you feel uncomfortable enough to go away.
Good on you. Do you know, I think it took me a really, really long time to get to the point where I was really comfortable. Just like having my boobs out and not caring. I think, and part of it, I don't know if this is true, but I think because I'd had so many difficulties trying to get breastfeeding going, like horrendous experience trying to get breastfeeding going, I think that distracted me from actually just enjoying it and going like, this is what a woman's body is designed to do. Like, it's all fine. I think there was, a lot of thought about so many different aspects of breastfeeding, but like expressing, I was triple feeding for pretty much a year. So there was lots of struggling, trying to get him latched on, then expressing milk, which is like
exactly
not fun. And then the topping up of the milk after you breastfeed, and then pumping again. And then it's like, do we have milk in the fridge? And that formula top up. So it was really like, it's weird to think that year happened.
This podcast is proudly sponsored by Cover My Bubble. Emma and Chris lost their baby girl Lily Beth at 1 month old and faced financial struggles on top of their grief due to not having life insurance. Now they help others by offering insurance for parents, children and bumps, covering critical illness to income protection. Visit covermybubble.co.uk to cover your bubble. Yeah, I'd literally gotten to the point as well where I was pumping enough milk to be able to have the next feed ready to feed her, and I had some in the freezer, but then I found out about something called high lipase, which is something that I have in my milk. And then she wouldn't take that milk, so I'd pumped a shitload of milk, put it in the freezer, and she wouldn't take it. And I was like, oh God, you know the saying, don't cry over spilled milk. I literally cried for days over that milk. I still have some in my freezer now from 6 years ago, because I can't bear to get rid of it, because I was like, I worked fucking hard for that milk. It's staying there.
Yeah, like you've got an emotional attachment to it because of everything that was going on. But you can make some jewellery.
I've already got jewellery. I've still got more milk.
You've got to do milk, much milk.
I'm just going to keep it there. Like every time my kids go in for ice pops, it's in the same drawer as the ice pops, and they're like, what's this? I'm like, boob milk.
Sure, you could probably, like, actually he's 6 years old now, but you know, like you could.
I'm not going to donate that. Were you going to say
No, I was just thinking if they're poorly or anything, but no, I've just remembered.
There might be a weird guy out there that might pay me a lot of money for that boob milk. So.
But you want milk bath, like, you know, if there's
6-year-old milk
bath,
yeah,
actually maybe
might
not
be the nicest milk bath.
But the high lipase is like is something that happens. I mean, again, before I had my baby, I had no idea this was a thing.
Nor did I.
But actually, I don't know how common it is. I don't even know if there's any figures on it, but it happens to women, and I've spoken to women as well. So I volunteer as a breastfeeding peer supporter. So because of my traumatic experience, I was like, I want to help other parents, breastfeeding parents. So occasionally I will speak to somebody who says, oh, my baby's not taking the milk that's been frozen. And it turns out it's because of that. So it does.
I went through a phase of having to boil it. I can't remember. Scold it. That's the word. I had to scold it and then wait for it to cool down, and it took like an hour to get one feed prepared, and I was like, no, I'm not doing this, because I was also breastfeeding, then pumping, then having to scald milk, and I was like, this is fucking ridiculous.
It's like how on earth did you do it? That's just crazy.
It was just I don't know why I'd put so much pressure on myself. I had somewhere in my head that my child had to have breast milk, and there was no way that I was going to go to formula, and that was me. I did that to myself. But there was nothing wrong with me stopping when I did. And now looking at my children, you can't tell when they stopped breastfeeding. So it's really hard. And what I would say to people is, if they are struggling, to just do what's best for them and their families. Don't listen to I'm sure it came from social media, like the pressure to carry on, but don't listen to that. Just do what's right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that as well as doing what's right for you, don't be afraid to seek help, because I think that sometimes people feel like if I reach out to somebody, so it might be there's the Breastfeeding Network, which gives free support. It's a charity. If I reach out to them, or if I reached out to one of the other charities as well, there's others, or if I paid somebody, an IBCLC or an infant feeding coach, that somehow they're going to make me carry on.
Yeah.
And they won't. Okay, there might be a rogue one out there that will do that, but they are there to help you in like whatever you want to do. So it might be that, do you know what? The best thing for you, once you've considered everything, is to introduce formula, and they'll help you to do it in a way that kind of works for you. And also, if you want to maintain some level of breastfeeding, then they can help you work out a way of doing it so that it doesn't jeopardize the breastfeeding part. Because that's the thing. I think that there is, for a few people anyway, I think there is a fear that if I reach out and speak to somebody, that they're somehow going to be like a member of some sort of breastfeeding brigade and they're going to make me. And that's not the reality. Like, figures show, they're quite old figures, but they show that most the parents that have, feeding their babies milk in that first year, they're going to be formula feeding. So breastfeeding isn't, we might talk about it being like the biological norm and it's a thing that your body is designed to do, but actually most people don't do it.
Yeah.
And I think that, you can kind of discuss the rights and wrongs of that. It's really complicated, but I don't think you need to feel like you're alone. So if that is something you want to do, you want to stop breastfeeding and you want to introduce formula, just make sure you're armed with the right information.
Yeah.
And and a lot of these people, they are able to help you with that. And I certainly do as a, my voluntary role as a breastfeeding peer supporter. We have parents, all the time that are doing one and wanting to switch to the other, or they're wanting to somehow manage both.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of formula shaming and breastfeeding shaming that goes on online. It's ridiculous.
That I dealt with when I weaned onto formula online, I was like, this is ridiculous. Someone was like, you haven't tried hard enough. I was like, wow. Are you in my life? Are you literally following me around? Because how do you know that? But yeah, it got to the point with the people that I was reaching out to for help that they'd literally tried everything. They'd tried different positions, had tongue ties snipped, like all sorts of different things. And it got to the point that they were like, do you know what? Actually, if this is causing you problems with your mental health, if it's making your baby poorly, just stop. It's okay to stop. And to have that person just say to me, like, it's okay to stop. It was like, oh, okay. Like, I feel all right now. And for a while I did exclusively pump, and then the scolding and all that shit was annoying me. And then I did like,
it's just an extra thing to wash though, isn't it? On top of everything else, like bottles and everything.
And then I did like half formula, half breast milk, and then like slowly weaned fully over to formula. But yeah, I got a lot of shit online for that. But I was just like, at the time, it did make me upset. But now I'm just like, like they're just online trolls. And
that's the thing, that I think you're probably like far enough removed from it now where you can kind of go. But at the time it would have really hurt. And I had literally the opposite. So I didn't know when my baby was born that basically breastfeeding was so painful. Like I'm talking like lacerations on my nipples within a few hours of giving birth within that first 24-hour period. Yeah. And it was so utterly painful that I can't even describe it to this day, like how bad it was. And it got worse.
Daggers, isn't it?
It really is. And like lipstick shaped nipples, which I didn't even know were a thing. Yeah. And he had all the signs of tongue tie, but I was a first time mum. I knew nothing about tongue tie. Yeah. I hadn't, as far as I know, I don't have that, and my mum had breastfed myself and my two younger sisters. Yeah. I come from like, generations of breastfeeding parents. I just thought it was going to be so easy. And to the point where I did no research like you. I hadn't ever read a book about breastfeeding. Yeah. I didn't, I fully supported people to feed their babies however they wanted to. But I just knew that I wanted to breastfeed and that was somehow going to be the thing that I do. So it was a shock. Yeah. And every time I did a feed, I would press the buzzer, every single feed. Yeah. And somebody would come over eventually. And it was COVID and there weren't a lot of staff. And there doesn't tend to be anyway on maternity wards, but there really wasn't a lot of staff. And they were struggling to look after all the parents that they had. So every time I pressed the button, they'd be like, yes. And yeah, exactly. And they were, I had a couple of really lovely healthcare practitioners who'd come over and would try and help the baby latch on. And they'd be like, does it feel better now? And I'd be like, no, it feels really painful. And I pressed the buzzer one night. I remember a midwife came over and she said, what would you like me to do? And I said, well, I just want to feed my baby and it's just not working. It's so painful. And she said, do you want me to bring formula? Yeah. And I was like, well, no, I just want help breastfeeding. I haven't asked for formula. So I had a lot of like kind of right from that first, 24, 48 hours, like introduce formula. If it's really painful, there is no shame in formula feeding. And I think that the support just wasn't there. So we had undiagnosed tongue tie. Oh. We had GPs and paediatricians telling us to just feed formula and not to listen to the breastfeeding brigade, to the point where, he was triple fed. So he had formula. And then when he was almost 6 months, I finally found an IBCLC who was willing to come to our house because it was like lockdown and all the restrictions. So it got to a point where somebody could come to my house, and she must have spent about 4 hours with me. Wow. And she said, this, like, you know, he's got a really high palate. She explained everything, and she said, your baby has got tongue tie, and this is what it means. This is how it impacts breastfeeding, and this is why it's really painful for you. And I was like, why did nobody tell me? Yeah, and she could only cut it to if the baby was younger than 6 months.
Yeah.
So she said, at this age, discuss it with your husband and make sure you want to divide it if you, that's what you want, because, you know, it might be a few steps back because he's learned how to feed with the tongue tie. And by the time I called her back, he'd just gone over the 6 months. So we then had to find somebody else. Travelled, we're not that far from London, but we had to travel to London during COVID and found a dentist, a paediatric dentist who lasered it. And I can't explain to you. So he was 6.5 months and I'd had that, what I've described, hell. Like it was literally hell. Every feed was so painful. And he latched on, and it was how breastfeeding should be. It was incredible. Like he was able to properly open his mouth and have his tongue in the right place. And it just improved breastfeeding immensely. I can't explain it. So we then like dropped the formula bit by bit. We got to a year, I stopped pumping, and then I just breastfed when I could. And he was on solids by then, which you remember that whole period of like, you know, introducing food and everything. And he's now 3.5, and we only stopped breastfeeding when I think he was just over 3.
Wow, that's amazing. Well done you for persevering, because it's such a fine balance, isn't it? Like, they are offering formula to you. I guess maybe they might be thinking in their heads that's the best thing because you're really struggling, but actually they don't know you, and they don't know how desperate you are to breastfeed that baby and how you always thought motherhood would look for you. So they're thinking, oh, let's just offer her formula because it's going to stop her pain, it's going to make things easier. But actually, if they'd have spoken to you a bit more and found out what you actually wanted, they might have figured out that actually you really want to make this work regardless of the pain, regardless of anything else. So it's such a fine balance, but you made it, you did it.
I know, and it's kind of crazy to think, you know, there's been moments where I've definitely, like, when I was trying to wean, which I didn't think I'd do. I thought I'd just let him finish naturally, like whenever he wanted to. But we decided that actually I would stop breastfeeding eventually because we wanted to have a second baby, and it just wasn't happening. And the only thing that anybody could think of was that I might be one of those rare people that my body just is like, you've got another human being reliant on you. We just don't want you to fall pregnant. So we then decided we would drop breastfeeding, and I felt like, you know, I did my time. 3 years.
You did.
Like, you know, I'm breastfeeding like a talking child at this point, so it was in some ways a lot easier. So I could explain to him, like, you know, that we're not going to have mummy's milk forever, that we will be stopping at some point. And it just became a process of over a few weeks. We just kept speaking about it, and he was really on board with it. And he kind of said, oh, bye, there's no more milk.
Did he ever just walk up to you in public and just try and get your boob out to just like have a feed? Because my son is very attached to my breast. Like, obviously he was breastfed, but now he has to like lay on them to go to sleep. He's always stroking them, and he still tries to get them out in public, and I'm like, stop, like, you can't do that anymore. And I'm like, oh my god.
I don't think that he's done that for a while. So when after our last feed, I think there probably were a couple of occasions where he kind of like grabbed my top a bit. But no, most of the time when he tried to get my boob out in public was during the period where he was still breastfeeding. And we didn't really tend to do it much in the day or when we were out. It was more kind of, you know, evenings or mornings. But there were a few, like, he'd fall over in the park, right?
And so the comfort, isn't it?
And then he'd be like, mummy. And I'd be like, oh, are you okay? At that point, not realising he'd quite like fallen over because it's like, you know, I'm talking with another child, we're on a play date, and it's all kind of a bit chaotic. And then he'd be like, oh, and he's like half crying and half grabbing at my top. And that happened so many times. And I have no issues with anybody else breastfeeding any aged child. But there are certain situations where even I, as somebody who's like, you can do whatever you like with your body, you know, like breastfeed for 2 days, 2 years, whatever. But there are times where I'm like, please, just, it's not the time. And then trying to explain that to a child that like, breastfeed, there's nothing wrong with breastfeeding. Like, you can breastfeed, but right now, when we're in Costa and there's like a table of like 3 guys, like right opposite, I just don't want to right this moment. That's really like difficult, isn't it?
But you've got to do what's right for you at the end of the day, haven't you? And like, even young babies, newborn babies, some people aren't comfortable to do it in public. They have to go like hide in a feeding room or whatever there is available. So I mean, it took me ages to feel confident enough to just go and just do it wherever.
Yeah, same.
So yeah, but tongue tie, honestly, is it's not talked about at all. Like, I, with my daughter, went to 5 weeks of the pain and the struggling and all of that stuff before they found the tongue tie and cut it. So obviously I learned all about the tongue tie, realised what it was. So with my son, straight away, the minute he was born, I was like, can you check him for a tongue tie, please? And they was like, yeah, he's got a posterior tongue tie. I was like, oh, fuck's sake. No one would cut them. It was COVID. There was they weren't doing the normal clinic that they...
So they said that it's there, but they just won't do anything.
It. We're not doing that clinic at the moment. Just carry on as you are. I was like, I can't carry on. It's hurting. He's not latching on properly. He's getting loads of air in. You know, the clicking sound that they make when they're sucking a load of air. Mm-hmm. He was doing that, getting really colicky because of it. He was screaming constantly. So we paid for someone to come and cut it. It reattached, and she then wouldn't recut it. It had to be an NHS job. NHS wouldn't touch him because he'd been seen privately. So he's now got a reattached tongue tie. And so I had to stop breastfeeding at 4 months with him because no one would do anything about the tongue tie. And even now he's got a little love heart shaped tongue and he can't say his words properly. He can't do S's and things like that because his little tongue doesn't go up, bless him.
So there is a big so this is personally how I feel from having done lots of research about this, like you. I feel like there's a massive gap, right, between, you know, the experiences that parents, often breastfeeding parents, are having with their children, and then what the NHS and what, you know, your GP, your midwife, what they're able to talk to you about, what they know, what they can offer. And it's really interesting, you know, in America, we don't often look to America with the healthcare system and necessarily envy it, do we? Because we're like, we've got the NHS and it's like amazing. But, you know, also like really struggling. But we kind of think, oh, it's great that you've got care that's free at the point of like delivery, and it's, you know, if you hurt yourself, it doesn't matter how much money you get help. But in America, and it's often interesting if you're doing research about tongue tie, a lot of the stuff is American, right? Like, you'll see a lot of US websites, a lot of US experts that talk about it, and it just feels like, depending on the state that you live in, but they just seem to know so much more, and you're able to, because you're often either paying or it's your insurance paying, you're able to get yourself referred to people that can kind of really help you. And my son's also did it's kind of partly reattached, so he still does struggle a little bit occasionally. You can see a bit of a heart-shaped tongue, but interestingly, like with tongue tie isn't though that can be an indication of tongue tie, how it looks, if it's pulling in the middle, it's actually function. So it's how what your tongue is doing and how it moves and how it behaves. So it's reminded me that often you'll get midwives, and so this has happened to like so many of my friends, where there's a bit of an issue around the breastfeeding, it's painful, and then the midwife will say, send me a picture of your baby's mouth, and then I'll see if I can get anybody to help. And this happened like not that long ago to a friend of mine. She's not heard anything back. Literally, it felt like she was being fobbed off. Like, just send me a picture, you know. But the picture's never going to tell you anything. It's not going to tell you whether the child's tongue... Like,
I've got a tongue tie and my tongue's pointy. So, like...
Exactly. They need to assess you. And, there is... Unless you have the means to pay privately... it's luck of the draw whether you'll get help.
And they don't tell you how much a tongue tie affects everything, because it affects the muscles in the whole rest of your mouth as well. So when it came to weaning Bailey onto food, he couldn't chew. He couldn't move the food around his mouth. He couldn't swallow. So he was unable to eat solid food. So I remember we were doing baby-led weaning, and he would vomit full chunks of food because he wasn't able to chew it. So we couldn't wean him until he was about 10 months. And then even then we had to do puree foods because he had to learn, and we had to see speech and language therapy. They had to do exercises to like stretch all of the muscles in his mouth. And eventually we got him onto solids, but every few months or so he would have a massive flare up where he'd struggle with his tongue, he would have a lot of reflux, a lot of solid food coming back, and we'd have to go back to puree foods again. And this was a child who had been seen by multiple midwives, multiple doctors, a private IBCLC, and just lots of issues with tongues.
Then people will talk about, because a lot of what you went through is linked to COVID as well and the lockdown, right? Yeah. Like, I'm not saying anything would have been easier if it hadn't have been COVID, but that definitely added to it. Yeah. And it's so frustrating when people sometimes will, I don't get many people that say this, but occasionally, like, COVID will get brought up and then you'll get the person saying, well, like, that's like in the past now. And you're kind of like, there are still people really hurting from what they went through during COVID. Yeah. Not because they caught COVID, but just because of how much COVID generally impacted their life. And I think that like a lot of people that either became parents during COVID or who had, their second or third or fourth babies during COVID are still really like affected by what went on because it was like, it's so strange to think that we did that.
It's just a massive shit show, wasn't it?
It was awful, Why did we in some hospitals, we made women labour alone?
I know.
How was that ever okay?
I was talking to someone about this on the podcast the other day, the fact that like when I went into labour with my son, my husband wasn't allowed in, so he had to sit in the car until my cervix was dilated enough for him to come in. I was like, since when did your cervix become an indicator of a husband being able to come into the hospital? It's such a weird time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Crazy.
It is very weird.
But what words of wisdom would you give to anyone out there right now who's like really struggling, is where we were and kind of maybe wanting to quit or trying to persevere but just really struggling?
I think if you're going through it already, get support. Like, I know it sounds like such a wishy-washy thing to say, but your partner, if you're going through this with a partner, is probably really wanting to help, but they're not going to probably know very much. So you've got, maybe your partner, your mum even, whoever around you, your friends, but they might not actually know very much about breastfeeding. And, if you're kind of maybe like our generation, I think you're a bit younger than me, but like kind of our generation, our parents, like my mum that wasn't the norm to breastfeed. Like a lot of people that gave birth around that time were formula feeding. So they don't have that knowledge to pass on or that kind of understanding of baby behaviour whilst you're breastfeeding. So getting support, and you're absolutely right. Like IBCLCs do cost money. So if you can afford it, a lot of the ones I've spoken to, and I've spoken to like a lot of IBCLCs in the UK, they are incredible and they have really studied breastfeeding and they know about like everything to do with breastfeeding. They know more than your GP, than your like paediatrician in a hospital, midwife, and they're really like really trained in it. So if you can, like, pay for an IBCLC, you could do one session, or if you don't want to pay or you can't pay, there are some amazing charities. You might have a breastfeeding drop-in near you. Find somebody that you are confident has breastfeeding knowledge, and just chat through things with them. Like that is, if you don't do that, it's kind of like pissing in the wind a bit, isn't it? It's like you're kind of trying to get it all established, and unless you've got that person to like hold your hand, to like, well, this is why your baby's fussing, and there's lots of times where people think they don't have enough milk. God, the amount of times I got told that when my kids were both cluster feeding, the amount of times I went onto like Facebook groups and was like, what's going on? And they were like, oh, you've probably run out of milk. Oh my word.
Like, no, I haven't. Stop telling people that.
No, and it's so dangerous because that alone will but it will just give people this kind of, I just need to stop now. That's what they'll be thinking. And a lot of like, if you get that support, then you're going to get the knowledge from people that know their stuff.
Yeah.
And will be able to explain everything to you. And it doesn't mean that you carry on breastfeeding if you don't want to. Like, that's not a thing. No one's going to make you continue. But it just means that, like, you know stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, like, how does breastfeeding work?
Like cluster feeding, I was explained it as they're putting in their order for tomorrow's feeding. So, like, they're trying to up your supply like that. Because I bet so many people quit breastfeeding during cluster feeding because they're like, oh, my baby's really hungry, I've not got enough milk, that's why they're constantly feeding.
Yeah.
But actually they're just putting in their order for the next day.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I was somebody that thought I didn't have enough milk, so I would pump and I'd be like, why is there no milk in my pump?
But also pumps aren't as efficient as babies.
No.
So I learned this trick as well with my pump, that if you're constantly stressed about how much is going into it, less will come out. So I put a sock over mine so that I could see what was going into it, and then I'd be really surprised. I was like, whoa, that's a lot.
So that's a really good thing to do. Do that and put like a comedy on Netflix or
Get
something.
That
oxytocin, like everybody talks about it, but that is so helpful. So with me, I didn't have the right size flange. So flange,
I hate the word flange.
So weird, isn't it? So I hate the word too. So what else could we call it? We could call it shield, right? So the shield is it often comes in really big sizes. So we hired the hospital grade pump in the early days. In fact, we hired it for the first year, but that's how like serious I was about trying to get breast milk for my baby. So I pumped like all the time, and I didn't realize that the shield was too big for me, and that's what was making it really painful, and not much milk was coming out. So I then bought the right size, and it was amazing. Like it actually started working. But I did completely have like an aversion to breastfeeding really badly, and no one really talks about this, but having really bad thoughts when I'd get the letdown. Do you remember that feeling with letdown? Edema.
There you go. My best friend has that, and she's still breastfeeding her 1-year-old, and she still gets it, and she's like, oh, I'm gonna be sick, and I'm like, nope, you're okay, you've got this.
And it can last like quite a few seconds at the beginning, and it's like it's hard to explain the feeling that you get, and for some people it's really serious, like you can have really dark thoughts, but that feeling like when you get the letdown, it kind of happens then. But I ended up like not putting him to my boob anymore because I just really couldn't handle it. It was also stressful, and I wasn't getting help, and then the pump wasn't really like working much at the time, so I pretty much went from like every day like trying to pump, getting 5 mil if I was lucky, which like 5 mil is like not very much at all, and then I pretty much relactated. And ended up doing like having baths with my baby, like I think on the 5th bath he then stopped latching. That was the other thing. Then I think it was like the 5th bath, we had like a candle on in the bathroom. My husband was there ready, because you can't get into the bath with a baby, can you? No. Like you need someone to pass you the baby. And like we did that, and I think it was the 5th attempt he finally latched on after so many weeks of not breastfeeding. So like that's the other thing, if you are struggling, or you've introduced formula and you want to maybe like ramp up the breastfeeding again, for whatever reason, like that's also something that can be done. It's not easy. It's not easy to try and increase your supply if you're further along, but it can be done, and people do it when they adopt babies.
Oh yeah, I think that's amazing.
Yes, incredible. So there's all sorts of like reasons why sometimes people will do that.
Amazing. I feel like we could literally talk forever about breastfeeding. Like you're talking about DEMA, like there's so many other things that you just don't learn about breastfeeding. So we're going to have to get you back for another podcast because it's time to spin the wheel now.
I really want to do this. I see your guests do this. I'm like,
let's do it. Okay, here it is. So if you want to give it a good spin.
Okay. Oh, I don't think my jumpsuit's like quite big enough. It's a bit embarrassing. I should have bought in a bigger size.
Oh, we have a confession. So while I'm looking for confessions on here, have a think if you've got any confessions as well.
I don't think I have anything that I'd like to confess. Not right now. Anymore.
You feel like you're in one of those
I'm
things.
Very pure. Like.
So I have booked to stay in a hotel room on my own. Hubby thinks it's for a friend's birthday. I just need a night to myself. I would so totally do that. I'm not going to lie. I
would. Yeah. No, I would.
I wouldn't even care about telling him either. I wouldn't need to say it's for a friend's, like, what did she say? Night out or something. I'd just be like, I'm having a night off. see you later, I'm off to the Premier Inn.
Yeah, so I totally would as well. I have broached a subject with my husband before about like maybe like I'm really struggling. I think I need a night away. It just never happens. So I think maybe just booking something and then just making up a reason while you're going might be the best thing to do.
Yeah. So I hope Becky never isn't watching right now. But we recently I had a night in an award ceremony. It was last week in London, and we were all booking hotel rooms by ourselves. And I was like, this is going to be amazing. I'm going to get drunk in my room on my own, going to have music playing, getting ready, get to come back, sleep in till whenever I want. But then we got gifted hotel rooms and we had to share. And I was like, oh, like Becky was lovely who I shared with. It was great, but like it just wasn't that experience of, you know, being on your own, not having to talk to anyone else.
Oh, I could do that right now. That would be so lovely. If anybody wants to gift me an overnight stay somewhere. But you know, have you ever done the thing where you leave to do something? So like you need something from the supermarket and you say to your hubby, like, okay, I'm going to go and get eggs or whatever it is you've run out of. Yeah. But then you stay out a bit longer. Yeah. Do you do that?
I sit in my car all the time. I, like a year ago, booked a click and collect shop, did the full food shop click and collect, pretended that I was going to the supermarket to do the food shop so that I could just have an hour in the car getting Starbucks.
Oh my God, that's brilliant.
I need a fucking break. That's literally a parenting tip for everyone out there. Just book click and collect and then just have a Starbucks on your own.
I'm so glad that this is why I think parents, mums, whatever, like, you know, just we all need to talk more because we're all doing these little things and maybe feeling guilty about it, but actually it's really normal.
Yeah, definitely. I'm like hiding in my car when I get home from work, even though I've been out all day, but I just need like an extra 2 minutes to just like not be a mum, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, I do it all the time. Anyway, could you finish by telling everyone where we can find your podcast and where we can find you online?
Yeah, so if you type in the Next Feed podcast into any podcast player, you'll come across it. I'm also on Instagram, which is the Next Feed podcast. Should remember that. Yeah, no, it is. And on Facebook as well. So if anyone, and yeah, just like come and say hi. We've got so many episodes in the bank, and being a mum, you all appreciate this, but it's really hard, isn't it, to like keep on top of everything.
Oh, yeah. That's why Darren does it now. I don't have to do it anymore.
So I need a Darren. So I've got loads of episodes.
Well, you're only down the road. You can walk here.
I could totally do that, couldn't I? I should just re-record all the interviews that I've already done. Yeah. But yeah, I've got loads. So they're going to be just like hopefully coming out with lots of different people. So we've got experts in breastfeeding and loads of stories from mums and other breastfeeding parents. People that pump, people that bottle feed breast milk. We've got like loads of different types of stories. And yeah, it's lovely because you don't get to talk about breastfeeding much with necessarily your friends, like if they're not doing it or if they've had a really traumatic experience, you know, it might not feel fair to do that. So yeah, it's a place where we can just chat about it and we're all like-minded.
I love that. I'm going to send my friend your way because she's struggling with like, which we didn't even get onto, breastfeeding grief at the moment. So we're going to have you back again.
That is a whole episode in itself, isn't it? Yeah.
To talk about that, but I'm going to send her your way anyway.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for coming on. It's been really lovely chatting to you. I feel like we could chat forever.
We could, couldn't we? Just like, would somebody make us another cup of tea?
Yeah, just carry on. But thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone for watching and for listening at home. Please give us a like, download and subscribe, and I'll see you next week.